Hello everyone and welcome to this side event at the 60th session of the Commission for Social Development. It's a shame not to be in New York physically for this meeting. UNRISD reports traditionally up through this functional commission to EcoSoc, but we're still working online. But that means we've probably got a much bigger audience and a much more diverse audience than we can normally get by being in a small room in the Secretariat building in New York. So welcome and thank you for your time, and I hope you find this side event today interesting. The topic is why we need a new eco-social contract for a just and green recovery from COVID. And the context for that from UNRISD side, I'm the director of UNRISD, my name is Paul Ladd, is that UNRISD is an autonomous research institute within the UN system that focuses on the social dimensions of contemporary development issues. And our strategy that we'll be working on under from 2021 to 2025 is titled Overcoming Inequalities Towards a New Eco-Social Contract. And we have 4 research programs underneath that and an office also in Bonn that concentrates on research uptake and partnerships. And the 4 research programs that UNRISD has are on transformative social policy, on gender justice and development, on alternative economies for transformation, and on environmental and climate justice. And I think what we found in UNRISD over the last several years is that our research highlights that the many challenges and crises and shocks that we're facing have at the heart of them, on the one hand, inappropriate and incorrect governance and incentives within our economic system, but also the breakdown of traditional social contracts in all parts of the world. And if we're going to reform those social contracts, we now need to do so in a way that makes them more inclusive, more real for the societies that we live in different parts of the world, but also at the same time, more ecologically sensitive and cognizant of the damage that we've done to our natural environment, biodiversity and ecosystems, and the need for future development, economic development, and social policy to be sensitive of those ecological concerns as well. Now we've got a brilliant array of panelists who will be able, I think, to speak to different parts of that discourse, both as practitioners, as researchers, as thinkers. And so I hope you'll enjoy their contributions. They're going to speak each for about 8 to 10 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have some space for questions at the end. Some moderation housekeeping remarks from me at the beginning. So this session is being live streamed via the UNRISD YouTube channel, where it will remain available afterwards if you want to point anybody to yours or other people's presentations. You'll see that we've enabled both a general chat box and a Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. Please use the Q&A box for questions you'd like to pose directly to one or several of our speakers, and put any general comments or informations, policy briefs or other research that you'd like to share into the chat box. Now, for the questions you put into the Q&A box, you'll also be able to vote and recommend them and push them up the priority order for answering by our panelists. You can vote for those. And lastly, at the very end of the webinar, we would like to share with you a very short feedback survey, and we'll be very grateful if you could fill that in, because it helps us to improve the future events that we run. So without further ado, let's get started. And I'd first like to turn to my colleague, Isabell Kempf, who is the head of UNRISD office in Bonn in Germany. Now, the office in Bonn coordinates a rich program of making sure that UNRISD research is relevant to the work of our partners, but also uplifting that research so that it has impact and reaches a bigger audience. And the office under Isabell's stewardship has built a rich stream of partnerships with other colleagues and entities in Geneva, but also beyond. Isabell personally has a long background working in social and environmental justice, including a long period before joining UNRISD in UNEP, in the UN system. And I think Isabell is going to talk to you about our work on the Global Research and Action Network on a new eco-social contract. Isabell.
Thank you very much, everyone, and thanks. I see there are a lot of participants, and I'm really glad also to see that my co-panelists, are really part of that very rich work and thinking about, why we really need a new eco-social contract. And I think the real idea here is to bring the social and the green movements and ideas and integrated policies together. But also to bring researchers, policymakers, and social movements together. And I think that's something quite new. And we would like to tell you a little bit more about, how this Global Research and Action Network came about with a small video. Rafa, please, can you show the video?
Over the last 18 months, COVID-19 has driven 75 million people out of work and 120 million into extreme poverty. Over that same period, the wealth of the world's billionaires more than doubled, from 5 trillion to 13 trillion. How is this possible? We know the system isn't working. Inequality is accelerating, nature is vanishing, democracy is decaying. We need something new, a new vision of a fair and sustainable world, and the rights and responsibilities that will make it work. In short, a new eco-social contract for the 21st century. This new contract needs solid foundations, human rights, and rights for the natural world. It needs many forms of justice. Work must be decent, and diversity is key. Many different voices are calling for transformative change, from the United Nations to Black Lives Matter, from the World Economic Forum to the International Trade Union Congress. To catalyse this diverse movement, UNRISD has teamed up with the Green Economy Coalition to launch a new global research and action network for a new eco-social contract. The network will join the dots between climate justice and social justice. Working with us will be partners from different communities and sectors: advocacy, practice, research and policy making. We're uniting to build a new understanding of how to structure our societies for a green and fair future. Join us and help construct a new eco-social contract that is sustainable, equitable and ready for the 21st century.
Yeah, thank you very much. Rafa, can we go back to the presentations? Thank you. The next slide, please. Yeah, I mean, as Paul and of course many of us working in this area have noticed already, that there are many reasons why the 20th century social contracts around the world have really been breaking up, and that these kind of has been really manifesting itself in multiple global crises and also increasing inequality within society. And of course, when we look at the big picture, we can see that the economic model is not respecting, natural boundaries, leaving us really in an increased state of insecurity and human precarity when it comes to climate change, and of course also the loss of biodiversity. Next slide, please. So, there were kind of different parts of society and around the world, again, asking for new eco-social contracts. But do they all mean the same thing? Business are asking for stakeholder capitalism, for providing servicing or offering services for better targeting of vulnerable groups and the poor. The UN has been asking, for universal rights, equal rights, of course, and has come up with this notion of networked multilateral action, which means that discussions and negotiations should not only include governments, but also other stakeholders such as business and civil society. The youth and the social and ecological movements, Black Lives Matter, Fridays for Future, are very much concerned with really ensuring direct participation in decision making and advocating for the rights of future generations, and also to have a much closer look at accountability and transparency of government action. And the trade unions also ask for, better social protection floors, better quality of public services. And then there are a lot of things also that they have in common, which is in the middle circle, in the blue circle, that most of them are really working in favor of non-discrimination, of gender and racial equality, equal opportunities, and then also the question of really, action now for climate and environment. So here we can see that the demands include both demands for social and climate action and justice. Next, please. So when we were looking at kind of different demands for eco-social contracts, UNRISD in its research has been looking at a few dimensions that seem to be really, really necessary for a new eco-social contract to be different. These dimensions include the human rights for all, especially for those who work in the informal sector, for example, and also those migrants, and also women who often still don't enjoy the same human rights in many, many parts of the world. A progressive fiscal contract, because if we want to make sure that we transform our economies and societies, there needs to be enough funds being put towards this vision. A new contract with nature, which would also include sustainable consumption and production, addressing historical injustices. And I'm very happy that Sirjana is here to talk about indigenous peoples in Nepal and how they have been included or not in the new constitution. A contract for gender justice, and I think which is really important, also new forms of solidarity to get away from the model of us against them towards a way where it is all of us united, against climate change or against or overcoming the COVID crisis. Thanks. Next one, please. So after this analysis, I think UNRISD really saw that there is an urgent need to bring in or to bring together those actors advocating, researching, and taking action in the green economy field and in the climate justice arena, together with those who work on social justice and also on the new social movements, working against racism or in favor of indigenous people's rights, for example. So in order to provide a space for debate and dialogue and also action on new eco-social contracts, such as new constitutions, litigations for climate action, etc. We created together with the Green Economy Coalition, and I'm happy that Zeenat is here on behalf of the Green Economy Coalition, this new Global Research and Action Network, which was launched in November, and we already have more than 100 members. So we're very proud of that. And we are happy that these members are very active. And most of our speakers today are members of the network. And we would also like to invite every one of you to become a member. Next slide, please. And you're very welcome to join us and co-create this new movement on bringing the climate and social justice movements and actors together. And we would like to invite you to be part of the network, write to us, contact us. And as you will see from my co-panelists now, there is already a lot of action going on. And I think by working together, we can really make a difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Isabell. That was great. And now I'm going to turn to, as you said, to Zeenat Niazi, who is the Senior Vice President and Chief Knowledge Officer of Development Alternatives Group, and as you mentioned, a member of the Green Economy Coalition. Zeenat provides oversight to the policy studies and development action initiatives at the Development Alternatives Group, and her work addresses resilience building in human settlements through sustainable consumption and production strategies, especially green and inclusive circular economy models. Now, she's been a founding member and co-chair of the board of the Climate Action Network in South Asia, the steering committee member of the Green Economy Coalition, the JAC in India, and a whole host of other advisory and chairing functions that are too numerous for me to mention, Zeenat, but hopefully you'll be able to give us a flavour of that in your presentation. Please, Zeenat, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to present some thoughts on behalf of the Green Economy Coalition. Let me share my screen without much ado. Okay, just do let me know if you can see my screen. Yeah, okay. So I have 8 or 10 minutes. What I would like to do on behalf of the Green Economy Coalition, of which we've been a member since its founding, to discuss what's happening in India. So I'm giving you a little snapshot from India on citizen voices, civil society voices, looking at a place on the table as we go through this this transition, which India, like many other countries of the world, is committed to. So very briefly, I will look at the India context. I will look at that's the stake that civil society is asking for, some gaps where we see some potential, and maybe a brief snapshot of examples, not too many because there isn't much time. And of course, the key message, which the umbrella of which is that if we are to build resilient futures, it has to be together. Going forward, not explaining anything on this. We've already been introduced to the Green Economy Coalition. This is what we are: 200+ partners, 9 national hubs working on different areas, but the core message being that we are looking at a progressive alliance building with social movements now to look at inequity champions, to highlight pathways, procedures, and mechanisms to renegotiate a new social contract in practice. This is our 12th year, so we are really reinventing, in that sense, ourselves and reaffirming what we have already done and worked on 5 core principles, being measuring, reforming financial markets, greening our sectors, tackling inequality, and valuing nature. All of that together now comes to fore. Very briefly, India's been on the news, I think in the global news for many, many reasons in the past few years. About I would say 7-8 years back, we were in the news on very, very high rates of economic growth. Our GDP was at the top, but it's something that is interesting that we should note, that we are amongst, at the moment, the most inequitous countries that you will see globally. The latest Oxfam report has highlighted that, and that there is a paradox between the privilege and plenty and the poverty and pollution that stare at us. Jayati Ghosh, a senior economist and professor in New Delhi, she has very clearly in the Oxfam report indicated that economies will not grow, markets will not deliver prosperity to anyone, no matter how powerful, on a dead planet. And she is bringing together the whole idea of social inequities brought to fore by our economic models and the state of the planet and the state of our ecosystems. The challenge beyond inequity is the challenge of the ecosystem collapse. We have the latest WWF report, which indicates the fact that you have losses in biodiversity hotspots, you have losses in forest cover, you have a huge deficit, biocapacity deficit, you have water stress. 21 of our cities, in fact, are on the verge of being of having a day zero as far as water is concerned. So we are in a desperate situation with respect to ecosystems. A much larger social issue that we have in front of us is the livelihoods and jobs challenge. We have had a 40-year high in November of the unemployment rates. Of course, some of it can be attributed to COVID, not all. And joblessness in growth has been a pointer that the economists have been talking to us about since almost, I would say, 8-10 years, that the economic models we are following, the kind of changes that we are seeing, we do not see jobs. And in fact, there's increasing informalization of jobs that are happening. And like you can see in the numbers, the 81% of our jobs are in the informal sector, which are not really recognized. And you see a whole range of unemployment, right from complete unemployment to steady self-employment, entrepreneurship. But there is all kinds of shades in between, of sporadic unemployment, seasonal unemployment, disguised underemployment, etc. And in this context, I would like to place the shrinking space for civil society. This is a situation we as civil society members face up on a daily basis. The dilution of mechanisms wherever they did exist in our formal public sector discourse, the governance discourse, of people's voices in governance. So we've had various mechanisms that were instituted, the Right to Information Act, consultation, public consultation processes when environmental clearance for infrastructure projects were given, or, and these have been, diluted over the years. We have increasing language barriers and digital barriers for communities and citizens to engage with their governance processes. There have been changes in the way our civil society funding and financing can be accessed, and that has led to reduced space for social experiments. We have moved from very much public funding space to a corporate social responsibility funding, which is a different kind of funding, very, very targeted and output oriented. We have reduced spaces for collaboration because of the changes in our FCRA law, where the grassroots civil society organization actually have very small space left to develop larger networks and partnerships. And unfortunately, we have, governments and civil society have never been on the best platforms or anywhere in the world for any government. But of late, there has been a much higher onslaught, if I may say so, branding of social and ecological movements as anti-national or anti-development. And so human rights issues are concerns that we have to deal with, not only that we have to work on them, but we also have to, there's a reduced space to discuss them already. There is, and therefore connected to it, a reduced space for critique and dissent. And you see that in the very, very high levels of social unrest that we see, both from economic concerns as well as from ecological concerns, which have had violent repercussions on them by the state in the recent past. But this is not something that is new to the country. We have had a very rich legacy of social change through civil society voice. And civil society action in this in India has been, you can trace it back to much before we got our independence. And in fact, our independence itself, the Satyagraha movement, was led by nonviolent civil society campaigns and action. Another very famous environmental campaign by communities and citizens was the Chipko movement, which led to a huge ecological sort of revolution within the country, or the Silent Valley movement, and many others. Some of these movements have had fruitful impact. Some are still continuing, like the Narmada Bachao Andolan's issues, which are not yet totally resolved. In the recent past, now what do we see? And now I'm looking at 2000 onwards, so it's like 2 decades, but still it's not so far off in our history. We see, and the ones that you see highlighted on my screen in red are the ones that are much more socio-ecological connections that you see. Those in the kind of black text are very much related to human rights issues, except the last two, 2019, 2021, which are again socio-ecological in nature. And you see some of these movements have had fruitful results, like the Plakitama Coca-Cola struggle, which was resolved by the Coca-Cola factory actually being shut down. It was one of those movements that was there. And the latest one that we have is the farmers' agitation, where the farm laws that were developed without consultation have been rolled back, and there is a new space for discussion created out of almost 1.5 years of sit-in campaign by agitating farmer groups in India, with a lot of lives lost and a lot of back and forth violence, if I may say, on them. One of the things that we have seen in these movements is the whole arena of livelihood losses because of ecological concerns. And our solution towards it, and the solution that we have developed as a platform with the Green Economy Coalition, is that of inclusive green entrepreneurship, which addresses the issues of jobs at the grassroots, on autonomous processes, and also looking at it from a climate and future perspective. And some of the key principles, which are the key principles in that sense of asking for space and demanding for space at decision making, but creating that space bottom up, are those of collective intelligence, shared social infrastructure, open innovation platforms, models that we have designed and worked with at the grassroots. And these have led to what we've called micro movements of social change, clusters of green entrepreneurship on the ground, with the whole ecosystem of support around it. And I'm just going to end with my last 2 slides, that the lessons that we've had in through these processes, and we have now 10,000 plus small green enterprises, local green enterprises, providing triple bottom line benefits with local support systems, is that the new eco-social contract that we are asking for, it must create formal mandated spaces for engagement of civil society to have a place on the table. The agitation is asking for that space, and it is not a space that is given to us as a gift. It is a right, and it must be formalized and institutionalized within our structures. This is what we are asking for, which is also something that, if you see the SDGs, it's ingrained in those in the targets that we are looking for them. In addition to that space, we are looking for a listening, sharing, learning ecosystem, so that policy learns as much from practice as the other way around, and that supports not a one-size-fits-all, but a diversity of localized solutions. This is what India is. India is the land of many and not one large. And this will of course require radical transformations in structural frameworks, in governance of natural resources, in the kind of techno-management solutions, the business solutions that are put out for products and services delivery, in the market structures, and in how finance is designed. And this will enable us to co-create inclusive green entrepreneurship. These will these systems will co-evolve in different spaces and different times, and they will co-evolve uniquely, is what we feel. But that's what the space would enable solutions to come forth. I'm going to close at that. I wish I had a little bit more time to take you through a few examples, practical examples, but maybe we'll come to that at the discussion space. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Zeenat. I mean, for on the one hand, highlighting an incredibly challenging backdrop where you recognize the inseparability and the non-divisibility of social challenges, inequality, but also environmental degradation, but also the compounding challenge of shrinking civic space and the closed space for you to offer your solutions and ideas. But then on the one hand, the spaces that you are creating, the myriad of micro movements for social change that are offering a positive way forward, new forms of entrepreneurship which are more inclusive and greener. And because there was so much in your presentation, I mean, if you have a moment, what I would suggest is that if you can put some resources in the chat function, I'm sure you're going to get a very strong uptake from members of the audience for the examples that you may not have had time to give. So thank you. Thank you again, Zeenat. So now we're going to actually turn to Finland, and again, another fascinating example. And we've got two colleagues joining us from Orchestrating for Systematic Impact, ORSI. And I think we're going to have a slightly split presentation where the majority will be coming from Liisa, Häikiö, and then possibly turning over to Eva Furman. And Liisa is the project manager of a project called Towards an Eco-Welfare State. And Eva is the deputy project manager there, but also a professor at the Finnish Environment Institute, Psych. Liisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you also for the presentation so far. It has been interesting. The next one will come from a slightly different context, and of course the issues are slightly different, but there are also some shared understandings, I would say. I try to share now my presentation, and let's see how it works. Can you see it now? Okay. So Eva is also here, Eva Furman, and I guess she will participate in the discussion, but I will give this lecture or this presentation because the time is so short. We did not decide to split it. But the idea of this presentation is to give some lessons from Finland about eco-social policies in the making. And I'm Liisa Häikiö, professor in social policy from Tampere University. And where do I come from? It is this ORSI project, and the idea of our project, it is a research project, but it involves also this kind of societal cooperation with different stakeholders and actors. The idea is to have impact on the way how Finland is moving towards, we hope, towards eco-welfare state. And the need comes from the fact that was actually very nicely described in the previous presentation, and I will not go deeply into that. But looking from the Finnish perspective, of course, one of the important aspects is that met social measures quite well in global setting, but we are stepping over the ecological limits, taking into account the global context. And this is the frame for our project, and we are aiming to address these challenges. Of course, it is also in Finland that we are not the same, but we have different groups of population, and therefore also the change touches differently different groups, and that is something that we also need to consider when trying to build up new eco-social policies. And here is just to give the brief understanding of the research project that I'm discussing now. It is a big consortium, and we are focusing on multiple aspects of society. And the starting point of our research is that we are seeing that these social welfare issues and environmental sustainability issues are dealt separately. And in the end, we hope that we will give some effort of bringing them together and seeing the connections and trying to build up a new understanding how steer society towards being socially just, but still ecologically sustainable. And we are having different phases in our project. And I will now give you just one small example of what we have done. And it comes from the this everyday life participation and democracy aspect, but also deals with transformative and innovative ecosystems. And it is somehow like in the cross borders of these two aspects of those things that we are studying here. And my example comes from one region in Finland. And here you can see, I do not know if everybody knows where Finland is, but we are at the north part of Europe. And Pirkanmaa is here at southern parts of Europe, or middle parts of Finland. And the region main city is Tampere, where our university is as well. And then there are many other municipalities also in that region. And it's not the majority of Finns living here, but it's something like 10% area in Finland. And what we did there, we did put up this kind of project on, or this kind of process of ecological transition in Pirkanmaa. And it was implemented last year. And the question that we addressed was how to refine vitality of the area from a socially and ecologically sustainable perspective. And we addressed climate issues and sustainability issues, but also small companies and research and development and innovation activities in the area. And how did we do this? We created different joint activities and tried to put different actors together, especially those working in small businesses, but also from civil society and from municipality authorities and from researchers from university and different research institutions. And we tried to formulate that kind of activities that create space for sharing and discussing issues. And one of the things that we did was this kind of ecothon happening, and we invited different actors to come in and discuss very daily issues that are actually very important if we think about sustainability transformation, housing, transportation, food, and also employment issues. So that was one of the things that we did together. The side process going on, and we were collecting actors to be more involved over the time. And we had this kind of network of change agents working in Pirkanmaa region. And there was something like 20 to 30 people participating in the project. And they were also coming from different organizations and different networks and communities, and trying to create new understanding together. What does this kind of ecological transition mean in Pirkanmaa? And together these change agents created a future vision for Pirkanmaa, and the aim was like create a vision towards 2050, and what kind of society we will have, what kind of eco-social policies there are in place, and what kind of things need to be different compared to today. I just have here a few pictures. We have nice pictures in that future vision as well. Also about other aspects of the vision. And on the base of the vision, this change agent network implemented small local experiments. And one of the part of these experiments was to discuss this vision together with other local actors. How do they see themselves in the vision? Does it speak to them, or is there something in contradiction towards their own expectations? So it was that kind of process of having different steps and bringing different actors together and for sharing. And I think it was very nicely said in the last presentation. It was about listening, sharing, learning, and that's very important in the process. And at the same time, the Tampere region was planning to make that kind of program, Pirkanmaa regional program. And actually some of the ideas and some of the discussions also were transformed, not from this like bottom-up process towards governance level. And actually this is the understanding or framework that Pirkanmaa region decided to apply to construct the program. And I think most of you can see it is based on this DOGNAT economic model. And there is this understanding that there are the social issues and then there are ecological issues, and we need to act within the space in between. And this is something that happened not only because of the this process that we implemented in the region, but it was, of course, the process was also participating in creating this understanding of that we need a new framework, not only for local businesses and civil society, but for the whole region to go to the future. And I'm coming to the end with my presentations. And here are some lessons that I think that we had from Pirkanmaa, if we think about an eco-social contract that we definitely need for the future. And one of the lessons is that there are multiple voices, and you also should bring in multiple voices in the process. It's not possible to make a contract that is only somehow focused on one-sided understanding of the reality, and you need to create dialogue between different voices. And then I think one of the things that we learned is that most people come to this kind of process from their own perspective. So they look the world from those things that they are doing in their daily lives and in their communities. And from that point, they engage with society and the planet and these different things. And you also need to create space for that in the process. And one of the things I think what was that we need new vocabulary to discuss these matters with different actors. And with new vocabulary, you also create new thinking with people. And I think that's an important aspect in this process. And just emphasizing this diversity of knowledge still, I think you also need to value that you have this diversity of knowledge. You need to bring it together. And of course, one base is this scientific knowledge, but you also have very contextual knowledge and situational understandings of the things. you have different experiences, you live different things, and you need to also create space for that kind of knowledge to be integrated with this scientific understanding of the situation. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Liisa. It's really interesting to hear how these visioning processes, like the one you've coordinated here with hackathons, with art, with conversations with different stakeholders, are thereafter able to have traction on political processes, whether it's budget allocations or policy decisions or policy directions. So that might come up as a question. For me, I was engaged a lot with the design of the SDGs, and in particular the process of reaching out to different constituencies in different places around the world to ask them about their vision. But that in turn did have traction on the positions taken by some member states. So it is entirely possible to use these sorts of exercise as a lever and an influence on policy, particularly when you've got young generations participating who believe strongly in a trajectory of fairer societies and ecological sensitivity. But thank you very much for your presentation. And again, please feel free to put additional resources in the chat function so that people can follow up. A reminder to our audience, there is an opportunity to pose a Q&A, although our time is becoming a little bit squeezed. If you've got general comments, you can also put them in the chat function. So we've got two more presentations, and the first is from Carlos Villaseñor, who is an ombudsman, a member of Ombudsman Energy Mexico. He's a political scientist by training. He's been working for the last 2 years as a senior analyst at Equal for gender equality issues in the workplace for organizations in Latin America. Now, as a member of the Ombudsman Energy Mexico, his task is to integrate the study of the social dimension of energy in the development, implementation, and evaluation of projects, considering parameters of energy justice and poverty, diversity and gender equality. So very relevant to our conversation today. So Carlos, can I pass the floor to you, please?
Yes, thank you so much, Paul, for the invitation. And I just like to start this presentation addressing the necessity to study in more depth the social dimension of energy. We tend to think of energy as a very technical sector. The discussion tends to turn around energy efficiency, sustainable energy, and the social dimension is very much neglected. What I want to focus on in this presentation is how to build a mainstreaming approach to energy based on human rights. So this dimension that I will share in this presentation, you already can see my screen. Okay, perfect. Okay. So this social dimension of energy has to be two-folded. It has to have two particular dimensions, which is the first one has to be how to build energy as a right, because we tend to think of basic human rights as something that depends on basic necessities. If you don't need it to stay alive, then it's not really a fundamental right. I think that's a short-sighted way to conceptualize human rights. I think that human rights have to be built upon not only what we need to survive, but what we need for a dignified life. And also, we have to start thinking of energy as something that not only is necessary for a dignified life, but also enhances our access to other fundamental rights. We can see in this chart the effects of access to electricity in income, job, and school enrollment. This is based on findings by the Inter-American Bank for Development. And we can see that it has gendered effects. It has more positive effects on women than men. We see a 42% increase in income in women and 22% in men when they have access to electricity, 50% in job, in access in the job market versus 8% in men, and 50% in school enrollment versus 8% in men. So to really conceptualize how far this energy right has to go, we have to also feel the data gaps, because we have so many, because basic indicators give us an unclear and unreal picture of the situation. For example, in this example, if we have subject A and subject B, and we only ask basic indicators like, do you have access to electricity? Do you have access to internet? Do you have access to a heating system? That, if the answer is always yes, then we might think that the situation of subject A and subject B is the same. They have the same right, they have the same access. But when we start to ask more in-depth questions, like how much of their income they are spending on access to electricity, access to internet, access to a heating system, how often they are in arrears in their payments of their electricity bills, how many people are dependent of the main income provider in the household, be it children or elderly persons or sick persons. If we account for gender, if we account for race and ethnicity, then we start to get a much broader picture, and we start to realize that yes, maybe both people have access to electricity, but they have access to very different dimensions of electricity. For example, here in Mexico, almost 100% of the population has access to electricity, but it's it varies extremely in terms of quality and in terms of access. So just to stay on the basic indicators gives us a very unclear picture of what these energy rights look like in Mexico. We as Ombudsman, we are trying to insert this social study of energy in our efforts to see, to complement efforts that are already being taken by public institutions, like, for example, Coneval. Coneval recently published one of the first gendered studies on energy poverty, but it's a very simplistic study. So it doesn't give us a clear picture of the status of energy poverty in Mexico. Now, the second dimension of this human rights conceptualization of energy has to be that we have to guarantee the ethical fulfillment of the right of the access to energy, because as some other presenters have talked about, the current system is very detached from the wants and needs of the majority of the population, especially certain sectors, like the financial one, for example. Isabell already talked about how, while many people fell into poverty and unemployment, the riches of the billionaires grew exponentially. And this dimension in energy is not very known or very studied, because we have this inherent notion that renewable energy projects are inherently good. We have an inherent ethical understanding of renewable energy projects, as they are good for the environment, they are good for our health, they are good for the economy. But when we look, for example, to this report of Business and Human Rights Resource Center, we see that from 2010 to 2020, we see around 300 allegations of violations of indigenous rights, around 400 allegations of abuse of the land and overexploitation. We see over 400 allegations of violence against activists and protectors of the land, and around 500 cases of corporate abuse in Latin America by over 156 companies. And around 68% are in Mexico and Central America. So there is a fundamental flaw in how we are implementing the energy transition in Latin America and in Mexico specifically. So we have to understand that a colonialist and extractivist model cannot be sustained with lithium and copper any more than with coal and oil. If we do not understand that systematic change is needed, we will be repeating the mistakes that we are making in the current system. So what does this mean, this double-sided dimension of guaranteeing guaranteeing access to energy as a human right and guaranteeing the ethical fulfillment of that right in practice? Well, for Ombudsman, it has meant to incentivize community-based and decentralized approaches to energy. This means for example, community-based energy building, where the community, because we tend to think of energy projects as these large-scale macro projects, but also local interventions where the community can manage their own energy productions can be very fundamental in guaranteeing an ethical fulfillment of energy access. Also building channels of communication that takes the individual context into account. I already talked about how understanding not only if they have access or not to the right, but understanding the context of their vulnerability, understanding the context of maybe their exclusion given certain identity characteristics can give us a better approach on how to talk and how to establish a connection with the consumer. Teaching and counseling how to use the existing mechanisms and institutions. These mechanisms in Mexico are very much are very bureaucratic, are very difficult to access, and therefore we need institutions like Ombudsman that simplify these interventions, that provide a pathway to guarantee their access to justice. Because, for example, in Mexico, the institution that attends energy complaints is the Profeco, but Profeco is not an institution specialized in energy. So they work side by side with the Federal Electricity Commission, which is the one the citizens are complaining against. So it's a very biased process and it's a very incomplete process. So this requires the citizens to have knowledge that they usually shouldn't have to have access to justice. It requires a mastery of the bureaucratic processes in Mexico that makes it very hard to access justice and to access mediation. Also, we act as a traditional ombudsman in the European sense, in which we mediate the interactions of the citizenry with traditional actors, with public and private actors. And we also simplify information for the broadest sides of the population possible. Because as I mentioned before, the sector has been very technical in their approach to energy transition, and they leave behind a lot of the population. A lot of the population doesn't understand the difference between all the solar panels that exist, if there's a possibility of making their homes more sustainable, what does it imply in terms of jobs, in terms of access to health, in terms of the price of energy, when we talk about these technical matters. So we try to simplify information for the broadest size of the population possible. Like, for example, if you, instead of making a market chart with all the variation of the energy prices or the gas prices, you put them in terms of traditional consumption, like the traditional household consumes this much electricity or this much gas, and this is the same as this percentage of their income, and you try to translate this information to the reality. It makes them more well-informed and more wanting to participate. So yeah, this is kind of the work that Ombudsman does here in Mexico. Also, we would need to incentivize the formalization of the place that civil society has in Mexico, because currently, unlike ombudsmans in Europe, we are not a formalized entity within the government process of mediation or access to energy justice. We are informal, and we are a small entity, an independent entity. So we need to establish these spaces that, for example, Zeenat talks about, that we need to formalize these spaces and this dialogue with traditional private and public actors, so we can expand the impact that institutions like Ombudsman can have in this construction of the new EcoSocial Contract. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Carlos. Again, I mean, thank you for highlighting the, I think, understood but often not talked about inequities in something as important as energy for all people. But also the fact that, you know, for transitions to be just, for necessary transitions between different energy systems to be just, it's not just about them being green, it's also about them being fair, and to be understood as fair, you have to talk to people and understand where they're coming from. And in particular, if there are very large structural or systemic asymmetries in power between different players, public, private, and community, then the outcomes are skewed, unfortunately, towards unfairness, and that you need public pressure and public participation to be able to actually counter those and turn them around. And I think one of the common threads from all the presentations so far has been about building engagement broadly across communities to gain different perspectives that can be then used and understood as leverage against unfair processes and against policy decisions that would otherwise go in a different direction. We have 15 minutes left, so we're going to quickly turn to the last presentation, which is by Sirjana Subba from the Federation of Nepalese Indigenous Nationalities. Now, Sirjana is a former Indigenous Fellow of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR, and she's been involved in activism to defend the rights of Indigenous peoples, women, and marginalized communities for over 2 decades. She's a founding member of the National Network of Indigenous Women Nepal and the Indigenous Film Archive in Nepal, and her area of expertise is in gender and social inclusion. And her presentation, as I understand, is going to be about how can a new eco-social contract work for Indigenous peoples. So Sirjana, please go ahead, please. Thank you.
Thank you for my introduction. Namaste. Next slide, please. Let me start with the status of indigenous people in Nepal. Actually, Nepal recognizes the indigenous people as indigenous nationalities, and even in the Nepalese constitution, indigenous people's rights and equality, inclusion, social justice were included there. And indigenous communities are recognized by the law that is of the National Foundation for the Development of Indigenous Nationalities. So it has recognized the rights, and even Nepal has ratified the ILO Convention 169 and UNRISD. So it is the only country that has recognized ILO Convention 169. So the preamble and the different articles have included indigenous nationalities, right to sovereignty, right to justice, and so on. So there's even a social justice and directive principle in Article 51, J8, and right to equality in Article 18, and implementation of treaties and agreements of Nepal, which Nepal is party to in Article 51. This is very important article, because if the international treaties, if the national law or the constitutions is not according to the international treaties, then the national law should change accordingly to the international laws. Treaties. So this one is very important for indigenous nationalities as well as minorities and women's perspective. Next slide, please. So here I would like to focus a little bit on the situation of indigenous peoples and their root causes, because right now the indigenous peoples are discriminated. They have not land rights. They have Nepal has been recognized now. 2015 constitutions changed from Hindu kingdom to the secular states and republic state as well. But the secularism is poor in the implementation, because it has the root cause that Hinduization, because Hindu hegemony, because state has been promoting Hinduism, and then because Hinduism, they have the practice of hierarchical division of division and caste system. So the indigenous peoples were in the lower hierarchy in that caste system, and even Dalits are lower than indigenous peoples in the caste system. So women are lower. So it promotes the female subjugation of indigenous peoples and Dalits. So the implementation at the level is weak. The secularism, practice of secularism is also weak. So, similarly, another example can take as the nation building. Before 1990s, Nepal was a panchayat system. It's not a multi-party system, it's a panchayat system. In this system, the nation building project was taken very seriously, and the nation buildings project constitutes promoted one language, one culture, and Hinduism. So due to that, it promotes the discrimination against indigenous peoples, and then in their culture and their languages. So due to that, now we are under the shadow of monoculturalism. And though our constitution says that Nepal is a multicultural state, but in reality, state promotes monoculturalism. It promotes Nepali language, Hindu culture, Hindu festival. They keep a lot of holidays on the Hindu festival, but very few holidays are considered of indigenous peoples are considered national holidays. So that's how in the practice. So next slide, please. So the even it's even in the constitution, it says it protects the rights of indigenous peoples and right to equality. Land grabbing is and the aggressive development is very common here in Nepal. In the first picture, you can see that men are running, army is running around, because in this land, government wanted to build a highway, and then that land belongs to the indigenous Newar communities. It's not far from Kathmandu. It's outskirts of Kathmandu Valley. So they wanted to build and the indigenous people of that land wanted to plant paddy in their land, and then so government used the armed force to drive them away, not allowing them to plant the paddy. So and at the same time, this is also a heritage site. When they tried to construct the road, they found a lot of artifacts in there. So and another picture is there's a house of indigenous person, and then they have built a high tension line in his land. So his family has been struck by lightning. So there's a lot of trade and land grabbing going on in the name of the development projects. Next slide, please. So there's another interesting notice from the from Kirtipur municipality, warning citizens not to file any petition against the development project. If anyone files the project, then they will cut off the basic services like water, electricity, and then the registration of birth and death and things like that. And especially this Kirtipur municipality, majority of the population belongs to indigenous community. So indigenous communities in many places are using filing petitions to the court for this kind of aggressive development. So there's another clips where news clip where indigenous judiciary system is very strong in the Manang among the Thakali community. So in that place, court is like jobless in there. So this is the news clip where showing the good practices of indigenous community judiciary system. Next slide, please. So why is EcoSocial Contract is important from the perspective of indigenous communities? Because in the past, in the constitution making process, there was a asymmetric relationships between dominant group and indigenous people. Dominant peoples feel that, groups feel that they are the grievers, and the indigenous peoples, they treat it like a receiver of those rights. So there was a unequal relationship. So this relationship has to be changed. From that perspective, it is very important to recognize indigenous knowledge, practices, and institutions. And it also focuses on the self-sufficiency rather than on dependency, because Nepal has been dependent. It's also beneficial for the government as well, because they don't need to, in the broad context, Nepal has been depending on the grants and fundings from the international communities and the international agencies. So it's also emphasis on the self-sufficiency, and it also promotes the rights of citizens and the livelihood. So that's it's also important because indigenous peoples has been not recognized as the equal citizens. They have been denied from their citizenship at many levels because they can't speak Nepali language. They don't have land and things like that. And so if they got the citizenship right, they will have the access to go into the formal sector. Similarly, they will have the land and housing, and even some communities who were nomadic and turned into the settlement process by government, like Raute and Chepang community. The government wanted to give them some land, but since they don't have citizenship, they could not get the land. That was the problem. So there has been a lot of problem regarding that, and they will receive social benefits like old age pension and single women pension, things like that, because they don't have citizenship, so they will be denied from that. And as they can, many of the indigenous people are traveling abroad for the employment. So citizenship is also important to get the passport. And collective rights is another important aspect of indigenous people rights. And so it will promote the collective rights as right to self-determination, participation, free, prior, informed consent. And it's also important to address the historical injustices. So EcoSocial Contract is important from that perspective to the indigenous peoples. Thank you. This is my presentation.
Thank you, Sirjana. That was great. And of course, you very ably highlighted the additional challenges because of discrimination and exclusion that Indigenous communities have in being able to participate in forming new eco-social contracts, but fundamentally just actually achieving the full set of human rights. unfortunately, we only have a minute or two left in the event. And I mean, the benefit of having these events online is that you usually get more people. But I did used to like the old events you'd have in rooms where you could go up and nail people afterwards and ask them questions and keep them talking for 5 or 10 minutes after, because Emily Marseille had a question for Carlos about the gender inequities, not just at the individual level, but at the structural and societal level. And I don't know whether, Carlos, you can quickly note down Emily's email address and get back to her with an answer on that one. Judith Hitchman also had a question about, if you like, the centrality of food and nutrition. And we had time to talk about climate, environment, and social justice on the other end, but also we didn't really have time to think about land, water, food, and many of the, if you like, sectoral or medium issues that actually filter whether economic, environmental and social justice is possible or not. And sorry, Judith, we're not gonna have time to ask your question, but hopefully I put it on the table for you. It just remains for me to say a couple of things. One is if you can keep an eye out for one of the forthcoming events that we'll have that relates to the network on an eco-social contract. It's going to be held on February the 22nd. It's an UNRISD Green Economy Coalition event, and it's called Rethinking the Eco-Social Contract. So it'll be in many ways a continuation of the presentation of different perspectives, because there is no monopoly in understanding what an eco-social contract is or will be in different contexts. And the second thing I wanted to say is that you'll get hopefully a survey to give us feedback on whether this was an interesting and useful seminar or not. So please fill that in, even if your answer is no, because it helps us steer these events in the future so that they are more useful to you as researchers, policymakers and practitioners. And Raphael, my colleague, has just put the registration link for the event I just mentioned in the sidebar. So if you're interested in that, please go ahead and sign up. So now I think it just remains for me to say thank you once again to the really interesting presentations from our panelists. Thank you for sharing them with us. This session will be on YouTube, as I mentioned at the beginning, and what we'll try to do is, with the permission of the panelists, take those presentations and perhaps put them on the UNRISD website on the page that houses the network, so that you can access them in the future and you can perhaps follow up directly with the panelists if you want to find out any more information. So with that, thank you for joining us. Thank you to the UNRISD team for putting the event together. Thank you to the panelists, and I hope you have a enjoyable remainder of the Commission for Social Development event, normally based from New York, but now virtual and global. Thank you.